You've been told war is about ideology, freedom versus tyranny, democracy versus authoritarianism. Here's the truth historians skip. Spain controlled all the silver from the New World, declared bankruptcy 9 times. The Soviet Union had the world's largest oil reserves, invaded Afghanistan, collapsed within years. America knew both stories, invaded Iraq and Afghanistan anyway. Now owes $38 trillion. The pattern is 2,500 years old. When empires face economic collapse, they don't fix the problem. They start a war to hide it. And right now, 3 nuclear superpowers are showing the exact same warning signs. Athens went bankrupt in 423 BCE. Treasury flipped from surplus to massive debt overnight. Athenian senators faced a choice: painful economic reforms, or gambling everything on one desperate war. They chose war. The Sicilian Expedition required 100 triremes and 5,000 hoplites Athens couldn't afford. Military leaders called it an irrational gamble even then, but senators borrowed from the Temple of Athena anyway. They needed Sicilian grain revenues to avoid telling citizens the truth about where the money went. Result? 18,000 Athenian soldiers dead, 7,000 enslaved in Sicilian quarries, every single ship destroyed. Athens never recovered economically. The bankruptcy they tried to hide with war became permanent collapse. Here's where the trap snaps. But what happens when an empire doesn't just go bankrupt? When they actually discover infinite wealth? Surely that solves everything. Right? Spain controlled more silver than any empire in history. Potosi mines were flooding Europe with precious metals. Yet the Spanish crown declared bankruptcy 9 times in 109 years. Why? Because they spent it all fighting wars instead of building anything productive. By 1627, military spending increased 150%. Income increased only 25%. When the Dutch captured Spain's entire silver fleet in 1628, immediate bankruptcy followed. Historians skip this part, because admitting it means admitting it's happening again, right now. The silver created an illusion of prosperity while Spanish industry died. Spain imported goods from England and the Netherlands, the very enemies they were fighting. Count Duke Olivares and crown creditors understood it was economically impossible. They financed perpetual warfare anyway. 500% inflation over 2 centuries. Infinite wealth. 9 bankruptcies. The resource curse is real. At least Spain was fighting for territory and prestige. But what happens when an empire's economy gets so desperate, it'll wage war to force another country to buy illegal drugs? Britain tried exactly that. By the 1830s, the British Empire faced a massive trade deficit with China. Silver pouring out. British manufacturers struggling. East India Company creditors demanding profits. British merchants found a solution: flooding China with opium from India. When China banned it in 1839, Britain declared war. 2 opium wars. Forced China to accept drug imports, secured Hong Kong, established treaty ports. The mechanism? British officials and East India Company creditors used military force to solve a trade deficit. They weaponized addiction to mask economic weakness. Most people miss this pattern until they see their own government doing it. China suffered millions of addicts. Decades of instability. British creditors and merchants profited while claiming they were spreading free trade. You might think this is all ancient history. Empires before modern economics, international law, human rights. So let's jump to 1979. An oil boom made the Soviet Union feel invincible. Prices hit $40 per barrel. Brezhnev and Soviet military planners launched an invasion of Afghanistan to secure their southern border and expand influence. 8 years later, oil prices collapsed to $12 per barrel. Soviet defense spending hit 17% of GDP. Carnegie Institute economists warned the USSR was fiscally unsustainable. They ignored the warning. Here's what happened next. By 1989, the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan. 15,000 Soviet soldiers dead. 2 million Afghan civilians dead. 1 million displaced. 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. Military spending during economic decline accelerated the end rather than preventing it. History has the receipts. The Soviet collapse taught the world a clear lesson about war during economic decline. America definitely learned that lesson. Right? Act 3. The Debt Bomb. September 11th, 2001. America had $5.8 trillion in national debt. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and congressional appropriators launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq anyway. By 2025, national debt hit $38 trillion, adding $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments now exceed defense spending. Pentagon contractors made trillions. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Halliburton. Congressional districts with defense contracts ensured continued funding. The wars cost $8 trillion. America tried something no empire in 3,000 years ever attempted, financing multiple wars entirely on debt during economic stagnation. Reserve currency status let them print money other empires couldn't, but the mechanism remains the same. Economic problems, military action instead of reform, worsening fiscal position. The pattern is accelerating everywhere. Maybe America's reserve currency really does let them escape the pattern, but there's one country that definitely should have learned from Soviet Afghanistan, because they were literally there. In 2022, Russia did it again. Defense spending hit 40% of the federal budget right before Russia invaded Ukraine. Oil revenues declined. Demographic collapse was accelerating. Carnegie Institute warns Russia faces a fiscal crisis between 2026 and 2027, the exact same pattern that collapsed the Soviet Union. Russian financial analysts and Kremlin advisors knew the numbers. They launched the invasion anyway. The cycle continues until fiscal or military collapse. Act 4. The pattern revealed. The mechanism is 3,000 years old. Remarkably consistent. Economic problems threaten legitimacy. Leaders choose military action over painful reforms. Short-term rally effect temporarily works through nationalist fervor and unity. War spending worsens underlying economic problems, requires more war to maintain legitimacy. Cycle continues until fiscal or military collapse. History gave you one difference. Previous empires couldn't destroy the planet. These three can. United States, 38 trillion in debt, adding 1 trillion every 100 days. Interest exceeding defense spending. Russia, 40% of budget on war. Carnegie warns of a fiscal crisis between 2026 and 2027. China, property crisis, 13.4 trillion in local government debt. Demographic collapse. Military expansion accelerating toward Taiwan. The pattern isn't about ideology. It's about the self-deceptive feedback loop leaders fall for. Believing nationalism can permanently replace economic legitimacy. Believing the next war will finally solve the problem previous wars created. From Athens to Afghanistan. From senators to defense contractors. The names change. The trap doesn't. You're not a passive citizen watching history repeat. You're a pattern recognizer who sees the mechanism 2,500 years before it completes the cycle. Watch for this sequence. Stagnant growth, rising debt, increased military rhetoric, foreign threat emphasis, war or intervention, short-term rally, worsening fiscal position. Repeat. Track defense spending versus infrastructure investment in real time. Recognize rhetorical patterns when external threats coincide with fiscal crises. Demand cost-benefit analyses before military interventions. Follow which industries profit from military contracts during economic downturns. Question when patriotism is weaponized to mask financial decay. Pay down personal debt now before currency instability hits. Diversify savings beyond your home currency. Swiss francs, Norwegian kroner, Singapore dollars backed by actual fiscal discipline. Hold some gold and tangible assets that survived every empire collapse in history. Learn practical skills, medical, electrical, agriculture, that hold value when paper money doesn't. Build 3 months of food and water reserves for supply chain disruptions. Create real community networks with neighbors because when formal systems fail, informal ones keep you alive. Ask Argentinians who survived 2001 or Russians who survived the 90s. The prepared didn't get lucky. They recognized the pattern and acted while everyone else hoped politicians would fix it. Recognition is protection. History gave you the warning. What you do next is up to you. Russia's fiscal cliff arrives between 2026 and 2027. America's debt to GDP is accelerating. China's property bubble is deflating while military spending accelerates. We're not talking about abstract history. We're talking about the next 24 months. History gave you the warning. What you do next is up to you. If you want to see what's coming, hit subscribe. History has the receipts. I'll show you where they're hidden. You think war is the worst trick empires pull during collapse? Wait until you see what they do to their own currency.